The morning sunlight filtered through the tall, narrow windows of the courthouse, casting long, striped shadows across the polished wooden floor. The room buzzed with a quiet, tense energy, the kind that clung to the air like a thick fog, heavy and inescapable. Reporters whispered to each other, tapping at keyboards, their cameras set up on tripods aimed at the center of the courtroom. The hum of anticipation was punctuated by the faint scratch of a pen against paper, the shuffling of feet, and the occasional cough from the audience. Every sound seemed magnified, each small movement holding more weight than it should in the ordinary world. At the center of this tension sat a tiny girl, no more than 3 years old, perched on her mother's lap. Her brown eyes were wide, round, and observant, scanning the unfamiliar surroundings with a mixture of curiosity and nervousness. Her small hands clutched a stuffed bear, frayed at the edges, clearly a source of comfort in a place that felt enormous and strange to someone her size. She had arrived in the courtroom with her parents, escorted by a kind officer who had promised to look after her if she felt overwhelmed. The child's mother whispered reassuring words in her ear, fingers brushing a strand of hair behind her daughter's ear. But the little girl's gaze kept darting toward the front of the room. Something had caught her attention. The defendant sat at the table ahead, a man in his early 30s with a tense jaw and restless fingers. He glanced at the little girl once, a flicker of unease passing over his face, before returning his attention to the papers in front of him. His lawyer whispered something quietly, and the man nodded, though his eyes remained wary. Across the aisle, the prosecutor adjusted her glasses, eyes fixed on the tiny figure beside her, an expression of quiet calculation on her face. The courtroom seemed to shrink around the girl and the officers seated nearby. A large German shepherd, alert and imposing, sat patiently at the front, its handler close by, both seemingly aware of the role they were about to play. It was unusual for a police dog to be present in a courtroom, and that fact alone created an undercurrent of curiosity among the attendees. Spectators shifted in their seats, some craning their necks to get a better view of the animal, while others whispered in hushed tones, speculating about the relevance of the dog's presence. The judge, a man with silvering hair and a reputation for patience and fairness, entered the room with a measured step, his robes flowing behind him. He nodded to the officers and attorneys, took his seat, and adjusted the microphone in front of him. Silence settled over the courtroom, heavy and expectant. The case itself had captured the town's attention weeks before. A local convenience store had been robbed in the dead of night, leaving the community shaken and desperate for answers. Investigators had worked tirelessly, retracing the steps of the suspect, collecting fingerprints, and reviewing security footage that was grainy and inconclusive. It was a case that had frustrated seasoned detectives until one officer had deployed the police dog, trained to detect scents, track movement, and locate evidence that might otherwise remain hidden. The dog had led them to crucial items that ultimately formed the backbone of the prosecution's case. The girl had witnessed fragments of the event, though her memory was that of a child, fragmented and innocent. She had seen the suspect enter the store, seen shadows moving, and caught glimpses of a distinctive bag. To adults, these observations might seem insignificant, but the officers had noted that children often notice details that adults overlook. The girl's parents had been hesitant to involve her, fearing that the courtroom's weight and seriousness could overwhelm her tender emotions. Yet the detectives believed her perspective could be pivotal. Her testimony might provide the subtle confirmation needed to ensure justice was served as the trial commenced. The courtroom was thick with anticipation. The gallery was full, friends, family, neighbors, and local media representatives, all waiting for a glimpse of the proceedings. Cameras were angled strategically to capture every expression, every motion, every reaction. The girl's tiny frame seemed almost out of place amid the seriousness, yet her presence added a unique, almost ethereal tension. Her innocence juxtaposed the gravity of the crime, creating a palpable contrast that everyone sensed, even subconsciously. The first witnesses were called, recounting details of the robbery with precise, practiced words. Jurors scribbled notes quickly, lawyers nodded at each other, and the judge listened intently, his hands clasped on the desk in front of him. With each testimony, the tension in the room seemed to increase. The defendant's hands trembled slightly, betraying his attempts at calm. The little girl, meanwhile, remained quietly observant, her attention drawn repeatedly to the police dog stationed at the front of the room. Something about the animal had captured her focus, a connection that the adults around her did not yet understand. As the morning wore on, the dog remained calm, head high, ears perked, eyes alert. Its handler whispered instructions softly, guiding the animal with subtle gestures. The dog had been part of the investigation from the start, and it seemed to recognize the gravity of the moment. The girl's gaze shifted between the dog and her mother, a silent question in her eyes that her mother could not answer. The tension was almost tangible, a thick layer of suspense that seemed to hang over everyone in the room. When the judge called for a brief recess, the murmurs grew louder. Reporters whispered into their microphones, preparing to capture the upcoming moments for live coverage. Spectators craned their necks, trying to guess what might happen next. Even the officers exchanged subtle glances, knowing that the child's testimony could pivot the case in a new direction. It was a quiet storm of expectation, an invisible line stretched taut between possibility and revelation. Every heart in the room seemed to beat in tandem, synchronized with the girl's silent, observing presence. Despite her youth, the girl was not intimidated by the courtroom. Her eyes were wide, curious, and surprisingly focused. She had spent weeks observing her parents' discussions, listening to snippets of police conversations, and hearing adults debate the significance of her small observations. While she did not fully grasp the legal implications, she understood one thing. The dog in the room was special, and it had done something important. Her small, tentative hand gripped her stuffed bear tightly, but her attention remained unbroken, anchored by instinct and the sharp clarity that sometimes comes only to the very young. The judge returned. The recess ended, and the courtroom settled into a hush again. Every eye was on the proceedings, but a subtle tension had shifted toward the little girl and the dog. Even the defendant's gaze flickered nervously toward her, as if recognizing that innocence sometimes held power greater than any argument or evidence. The police dog shifted slightly, a low, controlled whine escaping its throat, as if acknowledging the moment. In that quiet, unassuming instant, the stage was set. What was about to unfold would be unexpected, astonishing, and unforgettable, a collision of innocence, instinct, and justice that no one in that room would ever forget. And then, as all eyes remained fixed on the formal proceedings, the tiny girl, clutching her bear, began to move ever so slightly. Her finger twitched. Her lips parted. She was about to speak, and in that courtroom filled with expectation, tension, and uncertainty, the next words she uttered would stop everyone in their tracks. The city had not forgotten the events of that fateful night. The convenience store, nestled at the corner of Maple Street, had once been a quiet, unassuming place where locals stopped for snacks, milk, or the occasional lottery ticket. But that night had changed everything. Broken glass, overturned shelves, and the stolen money had left a scar not only on the store, but on the community itself. Owners, employees, and patrons still spoke of it in hushed tones, their voices tinged with disbelief that such a violation could occur in their midst. Police investigations had ensued immediately, yet the trail seemed frustratingly thin. The initial evidence was inconclusive. Security cameras had captured vague shadows, faces obscured by hoods, movements that suggested haste but not identity. Officers had knocked on doors, interviewed witnesses, and reviewed records, but leads evaporated almost as quickly as they appeared. The community was anxious, frustrated, and desperate for resolution. Shopkeepers increased security, parents whispered warnings to their children, and the local news covered the investigation relentlessly, highlighting the uncertainty and danger that had intruded upon ordinary lives. It was a crime that everyone wanted solved, a story that demanded closure. Among those who had been present at the scene was the little girl. Though at 3 years old, her understanding of events was rudimentary. She had been accompanying her mother on a quick errand, a seemingly insignificant trip that would later prove pivotal. From the corner of her eye, she saw someone enter the store, carrying something in their hands. Her tiny mind absorbed details adults might dismiss: the color of the bag, the way the light reflected off a jacket, the subtle pause before the door slammed shut. It was a child's memory, fragmentary yet precise in its way, untouched by bias, assumption, or judgment. The detectives realized early on that children often notice what adults overlook. Their minds, uncluttered by preconceptions, could retain small but crucial details. The officers had observed her closely in the days following the incident, gently asking questions, recording her recollections with patience, careful not to impose suggestions or interpretations. Her answers were often surprising, brief but pointed. She remembered the glint of a silver object in the suspect's hand. She remembered a sound, a tiny click, that others had missed. Her observations, though innocent and unpolished, began to form threads that connected with the scattered, incomplete evidence. Central to the investigation was the police dog, a disciplined and highly trained German shepherd named Max. Max had been with the force for several years, involved in dozens of operations, and had a reputation for accuracy and loyalty. He could detect scents invisible to humans, track movements across neighborhoods, and locate objects that seemed lost forever. That night, Max had been deployed to trace the suspect's path, sniffing the air for traces of the perpetrator. The dog had led officers to a dumpster behind a nearby alley, where a small, critical item had been discarded, a piece of evidence that would later become central in court. The girl, when asked, had quietly indicated that she recognized the scent on the object. Her words had been simple: "That's it." While her parents had initially dismissed the remark as childlike babble, the detectives had recorded it, knowing that even small insights could carry enormous significance. The convergence of Max's tracking skills and the girl's observational acuity created a synergy the investigators had not anticipated. They realized that her testimony, though brief, might validate the chain of evidence, confirming that the suspect had indeed been at the location in question and had discarded the stolen item. In the weeks leading up to the trial, the community had grown more invested in the case. Local news outlets ran daily updates, interviews with police officers highlighted the dog's involvement, and public discussions buzzed around the small, 3-year-old witness. Many were skeptical, unable to believe that a child could hold the key to such a serious investigation. Others were fascinated, intrigued by the idea that innocence and instinct might solve a problem that had eluded seasoned professionals. The tension in the city mirrored the tension in the courtroom, a collective anxiety and anticipation that seemed almost tangible. The girl's parents were protective, oscillating between pride and worry. They understood that bringing her into a courtroom would expose her to intense scrutiny, to the serious weight of legal proceedings far beyond her years. They debated extensively with detectives and lawyers, ultimately agreeing to her participation only under strict supervision. Her mother would remain close at hand, her father prepared to intervene if needed. The child, meanwhile, remained unaware of the gravity of her role, focusing instead on the familiar presence of Max, whose calm, steady demeanor seemed to reassure her in ways no words could dot as trial day approached. The defense prepared its strategy, attempting to undermine the credibility of both the dog and the child. Questions were anticipated. Could a 3-year-old provide reliable testimony? Could a dog's tracking evidence stand in a court of law? The defense argued that neither should carry undue influence, emphasizing that human memory was fallible, and animals, while trained, were still incapable of conveying complex truths. Yet the prosecution countered with meticulous records, photographs, and prior witness statements, highlighting the accuracy of the dog's tracking, a careful documentation of the child's observations, and the undeniable chain of events linking the suspect to the crime scene. On the morning of the trial, the community's anticipation reached its peak. Reporters camped outside the courthouse. Families and neighbors gathered in the halls, and the courtroom itself was filled to capacity. The air was thick with expectation, every person aware that something unusual, extraordinary even, was about to unfold. Conversations were hushed, eyes darting nervously between the entrances, the witnesses, and the defendant. There was a sense that this trial was more than a legal proceeding. It was a test of perception, observation, and the unexpected power of innocence. When the girl arrived, escorted by her mother and the officer, a hush fell over the courtroom. Cameras clicked, capturing the moment, while jurors and spectators leaned forward, sensing that the tiny figure before them held more importance than her size suggested. She carried her bear tightly, eyes flicking briefly to her parents, then to Max, who sat patiently at the front, ears alert. The defendant's gaze followed her, subtle tension etching his features as he realized that her testimony could prove decisive. The room seemed to contract, focusing all attention on the small, unassuming witness whose role was about to shift from background observer to pivotal participant. The prosecution began its opening statement, recounting the events of the robbery, the investigation that followed, and the critical role of the police dog. Jurors listened intently, absorbing the details with careful concentration. The little girl's presence was noted repeatedly, though described delicately to preserve the courtroom's decorum. Her observations, though childlike in delivery, were framed as vital components of the case, illustrating how even the smallest witnesses could contribute to justice. Every person in the room, from the judge to the defense team, from officers to reporters, sensed the unusual weight of what was about to occur. And then, amid the legal arguments and formal proceedings, the girl shifted slightly in her mother's lap. Her gaze fixed on Max, her tiny hand rising almost imperceptibly. She had been listening, observing, and processing, in a way uniquely possible for someone so young. What came next would surprise everyone, defying expectations, and forever embedding her presence into the story of this trial. The courtroom, filled with adults experienced in law, procedure, and logic, was about to witness the extraordinary clarity of a child's innocent perception, setting the stage for the moment that would stun everyone present. The tension was palpable. Every movement, every glance, seemed to carry significance. The girl's quiet breathing, the subtle shift of her small frame, the flicker of recognition in her eyes, all were magnified in the intense stillness. Observers leaned forward, reporters adjusted cameras, and the officers exchanged subtle glances, understanding the importance of the approaching moment. In that brief, suspended instant, the world seemed to narrow down to the small girl, her bear, and the police dog. Every heartbeat counted. Every second stretched longer than normal. The stage was set for an act so simple, yet so profound, that it would become the defining moment of the trial. The community outside would later recount it with awe. The jurors would reflect on it with amazement, and the family would remember it forever as the instant when innocence and truth intersected. The case had unfolded over weeks of investigation, but it was about to be crystallized in two tiny, unforgettable words. The girl, unaware of the attention she commanded, lifted her hand, pointing, ready to speak. And in that anticipation, the entire courtroom held its breath. The courtroom had settled into a tense, almost unbearable stillness. Outside, the summer sun beat down on the courthouse steps, but inside, the atmosphere was thick with anticipation. Spectators fidgeted, journalists leaned forward over their notebooks, and cameras were adjusted repeatedly to capture every expression, every subtle movement. The judge sat with a composed, serious expression, hands folded neatly on the desk in front of him. Yet even he could not conceal the faint glimmer of curiosity in his eyes as he glanced at the tiny witness sitting nervously beside her mother. The little girl, clutching her worn stuffed bear, looked around the courtroom with a mix of curiosity and caution. Her wide brown eyes absorbed everything: the murmuring crowd, the clicking of cameras, the somber faces of the jurors. She was small, almost fragile-looking, yet there was a quiet intensity in her gaze, a sharpness that belied her age. Something about her presence commanded attention, even among seasoned lawyers and law enforcement officers. Her focus, however, remained fixed on the front of the room, where the police dog sat calmly beside its handler. Max, the German shepherd, had been carefully trained for these situations. The dog remained seated, alert but composed, eyes following the courtroom activity with a quiet intelligence. The handler, a veteran officer with years of experience working with K-9 units, kept a steady hand on the leash, his posture relaxed but ready. The dog's reputation for precision and loyalty preceded him, and many in the room regarded him with a mixture of awe and slight apprehension. A police dog in a courtroom was unusual, but in this case, it had become essential to the unfolding story. The defendant, a man in his early 30s, appeared restless. His hands fidgeted with a pen, tapping it lightly against the wooden table. Every now and then, his gaze flicked toward the girl, a shadow of unease passing across his face. He had been confident during the investigation, certain that the lack of direct evidence would protect him. But the presence of a child, an innocent observer, and a meticulously trained police dog introduced variables he could not control. His lawyer leaned over occasionally, whispering reassurances, but the tension in the room was palpable and unrelenting. The prosecutor began to outline the case for the jury, her voice calm but firm. She recounted the events of the robbery with precision, emphasizing the difficulties faced by the investigators and the crucial role played by Max, the police dog. She highlighted how the dog had tracked the suspect from the scene to a nearby alley, locating a discarded item that directly connected the perpetrator to the crime. Every word was deliberate, building toward the key moment, the little girl's testimony. The jury leaned forward, absorbing each detail, aware that the upcoming statement could shift the entire trajectory of the trial. Witnesses were called one after another, detailing the robbery, the investigation, and the evidence collected. Each testimony added a layer to the story, painting a clearer picture for the jury. Yet, despite the thorough accounts from adults and professionals, the room remained charged with a sense of expectation. Everyone instinctively knew that the defining moment had not yet arrived. Their attention, however, was subtly drawn toward the child. Her small hands gripped her bear, and her gaze followed every motion of Max. The dog, too, seemed to sense her presence, occasionally shifting his eyes toward her, creating a quiet, almost imperceptible connection between the two. The girl had been listening, quietly processing what had been said. Though her understanding was filtered through the lens of a 3-year-old, there was clarity in her observations. She remembered fragments of the night of the robbery, details unnoticed by others, the glint of a silver object, the faint smell of leather, the small sound of footsteps over gravel. These pieces, though seemingly minor, were vital to confirming the timeline and actions of the suspect. The officers had noted this keen attention during interviews, recognizing that the child's perception might prove unexpectedly accurate. A hush fell over the room when the judge called for a brief pause. He allowed the jury to stretch, encouraged the spectators to remain quiet, and reminded everyone of the seriousness of the proceedings. Outside the room, whispers circulated, speculating about the child's role and the dog's presence. Many were skeptical. A 3-year-old could hardly provide reliable testimony, some argued. Others were captivated by the unusual scenario, eager to see whether innocence and instinct could indeed influence the course of justice. The tension had reached a crescendo, an almost tangible pressure that pressed on every shoulder in the room. During the recess, the little girl remained calm, her mother's hand gently resting on her small shoulder. She glanced at Max, her eyes lighting up with recognition and comfort. The dog's calm presence seemed to steady her, as if acknowledging that she had an important role to play. The handler whispered softly to Max, who responded with a subtle, reassuring movement. Even the officers, used to high-pressure situations, exchanged quiet nods, understanding the delicate balance between patience, observation, and timing. Everything was being orchestrated with precision, waiting for the exact moment the girl would speak. The defendant shifted uneasily in his seat as proceedings resumed. He glanced at the little girl again, a flicker of unease evident in his eyes. His confidence had been eroded by the meticulous investigation and the mounting evidence. But now, a child's simple presence seemed to cast a shadow over his assumptions. The defense lawyer attempted to project calm, but even they recognized that the unpredictability of a 3-year-old's testimony could prove disruptive, perhaps even decisive. The courtroom collectively held its breath, aware that the next few moments could determine the trajectory of the trial. The girl's mother whispered softly, reminding her to stay calm. The child nodded, though her focus remained unwavering, trained entirely on Max and the events unfolding before her. She shifted slightly in her mother's lap, a small movement that caught the attention of those closest to her. It was subtle, yet charged with potential significance. The jury watched intently, their eyes flicking between the girl and the police dog, sensing that the impending moment was about to unfold. Every adult in the room leaned forward slightly, their curiosity, anticipation, and anxiety blending into a collective suspense. The prosecutor called the child to the stand, her voice gentle and encouraging. "Can you tell us what you saw?" she asked, framing the question in terms simple enough for the little girl to understand. The child's gaze did not waver. She looked at Max, then at the dog's handler, processing the memory of that night. She remembered the suspect entering the store, the object in his hands, and the path he had taken. The room seemed to shrink around her, every eye focused on her small frame, anticipating a revelation that would soon come. With a deep, innocent breath, the girl lifted her tiny hand, pointing directly at Max. Her finger trembled slightly, but the gesture was deliberate. Every head in the courtroom turned toward the dog, following the small motion of the child's hand. A murmur rippled through the spectators. Cameras clicked rapidly, capturing the moment that defied conventional expectations. Jurors exchanged glances. The defendant froze, and even the judge leaned forward slightly, recognizing that this seemingly simple gesture carried weight far beyond its size. The little girl's lips parted, and in a soft, clear voice that cut through the silence, she spoke 2 words. "That one." The room fell utterly still. Gasps escaped from the gallery, pens hovered mid-air, and the defendant's jaw tightened. Even the seasoned officers, who had seen countless unusual courtroom moments, were taken aback by the clarity and immediacy of the child's observation. In 2 words, she had directed attention to the exact police dog involved in the investigation, connecting innocence, instinct, and evidence in a way that stunned everyone present. The prosecutor smiled subtly, aware that the child's words had confirmed a crucial link in the case. The judge, maintaining his composure, asked gently for clarification. "Can you explain why you pointed at that dog?" he inquired. The girl's eyes flicked between Max and her mother. She pointed again, repeating the gesture, and whispered something so quiet that only those nearest could hear. The courtroom collectively leaned in, straining to understand. The simplicity and precision of her identification created a wave of realization. As the significance of her small action began to unfold, every person in the room began to comprehend the power of the moment. The police dog, trained for precision, had tracked the suspect to a critical piece of evidence, and the child had recognized it instinctively. Her observation, innocent and untainted by the biases and assumptions that colored adult perception, confirmed the sequence of events that had been meticulously documented. The jurors, witnesses, and officers felt a mixture of awe, relief, and disbelief. A child's simple act had become a linchpin in the pursuit of justice, bridging gaps that adults alone might never have resolved. The defendant slumped slightly in his chair, the tension in his shoulders giving way to visible anxiety. His lawyer whispered hurriedly, but even they realized that undermining the child's testimony would be nearly impossible. The precision, clarity, and innocence of her words, combined with the dog's documented tracking, had created a formidable narrative that could not be dismissed. The courtroom atmosphere shifted. The courtroom seemed to hold its breath. The tiny girl, no more than 3 years old, had just pointed at the police dog and uttered 2 words. That one. In the stunned silence that followed, time appeared to slow. The clicks of cameras ceased for a heartbeat, the scribbles of jurors' pens froze, and even the faint hum of the ventilation seemed to quiet. Every eye was on her, trying to comprehend the gravity hidden behind the innocence of those 2 simple words. In that moment, the courtroom's usual rhythm, composed, procedural, predictable, had shifted into something extraordinary. The defendant's face paled, and he leaned slightly forward, gripping the edge of the table with white-knuckled fingers. The confidence he had carried into the trial, bolstered by months of preparation and anticipation, evaporated in the face of a child's spontaneous observation. His lawyer whispered urgently, attempting to calm him, yet the tension in the room was palpable and unstoppable. There was no disputing what had just occurred. A child had pointed directly to a key piece of the investigation, highlighting the police dog central to the case. The judge, a veteran of countless trials, remained composed outwardly, yet the surprise was evident in the slight narrowing of his eyes. He leaned forward, elbows resting on the bench, his voice calm but curious. "Young lady," he said gently, "can you tell us why you pointed at that dog?" The question was carefully phrased, designed to elicit clarity without causing undue stress. The girl's small fingers twitched as she pointed again, this time more deliberately, her brown eyes wide with focus and determination. She was ready, in her own simple way, to confirm what she had seen. The prosecutor, seated confidently, allowed the moment to unfold naturally. Her calm demeanor contrasted sharply with the tension that vibrated through the gallery. She understood that the girl's testimony, so small in words but monumental in impact, would be remembered long after the trial ended. Every gesture, every motion of the child and the police dog had been meticulously noted by investigators, ensuring that the forthcoming revelation was supported by factual evidence. The courtroom, normally a place of strict procedure, now felt charged with raw human emotion. The gallery reacted with a mixture of astonishment and curiosity. Spectators leaned forward, craning their necks to see more clearly. Reporters whispered into microphones, eager to capture the unfolding moment. The jurors, trained to remain impartial, struggled to mask their astonishment. Even seasoned officers who had seen numerous investigations were caught off guard by the simplicity and immediacy of the child's observation. In that quiet, intense space, a profound truth was emerging. Sometimes the smallest voices carry the greatest weight. The girl shifted slightly in her mother's lap, the stuffed bear tucked securely under her arm. Her lips parted again, and in a soft, measured voice, she repeated, "That one." The repetition reinforced the clarity of her observation, leaving no room for ambiguity. The gesture, paired with the words, created a visual and verbal confirmation that was impossible to ignore. Max, the police dog, remained calm, sitting with poised attentiveness, as if aware of the significance of the moment. The connection between child and dog, unspoken yet unmistakable, resonated throughout the courtroom. Whispers began to ripple through the spectators. "Did you see that?" one woman murmured to her companion. "The little girl? She knows something." A journalist clicked rapidly on a recorder, scribbling notes in shorthand. The defendant's unease deepened. He shifted in his seat, adjusting his tie, trying to regain composure. Yet every movement was mirrored by the recognition that the girl's testimony, though brief, carried undeniable significance. His confidence waned under the weight of two words and a pointed finger, a simple act that connected innocence to the precise chain of evidence. The judge, maintaining a measured tone, asked the girl again to clarify. "Can you show us what you mean, sweetie?" he said. Her tiny hand rose once more, pointing decisively at Max. She hesitated for a brief second, then nodded as if confirming to herself that she was doing the right thing. Her brown eyes flicked toward the handler, seeking silent affirmation, and then returned to the dog. The gallery leaned in almost imperceptibly, sensing that what was about to be revealed would leave a lasting impression. On everyone in the room, the officers exchanged subtle glances, acknowledging the significance of the child's identification. Max, trained to detect and respond to specific cues, remained composed, but the low hum of anticipation was evident even to those accustomed to high-stress operations. The dog's precise training had made him a reliable witness in the investigation, and the girl's pointing action validated his role in a tangible, undeniable way. The prosecutor smiled faintly, recognizing that the combination of child's observation and dog's tracking could provide the jury with clarity that words alone might fail to convey. The defendant's lawyer attempted to intervene, questioning the reliability of a 3-year-old's observation. Yet even in their carefully crafted arguments, there was a subtle acknowledgement that the child's identification aligned perfectly with the documented evidence. Every officer, every investigator, every juror had seen the dog trace the suspect to the key piece of evidence, an act now verified by the innocent, yet precise observation of the tiny witness. The courtroom atmosphere, once tense and procedural, had transformed into a tableau of astonishment, suspense, and human connection. The girl's parents watched with mixed emotions. Relief, pride, and awe mingled as they observed their child's unassuming yet profound participation. Her small gesture had introduced clarity into a case fraught with uncertainty. Tears welled in her mother's eyes as she whispered encouragement, brushing a strand of hair from the girl's forehead. The father's hands clenched slightly, a mix of pride and lingering concern etched on his face. They understood, more than anyone, the weight of this tiny moment, a 3-year-old's ability to bridge innocence and justice in a single act. Max, the police dog, remained at the front, ears alert, tail still. The handler subtly patted him, acknowledging the dog's contribution. Every person in the room recognized the quiet dignity of the moment. A child and a dog, two seemingly small participants, had just altered the dynamics of a serious trial. The gallery murmured quietly, some nodding in appreciation, others exchanging astonished glances. The defendant's composure continued to erode, replaced by the creeping realization that the trajectory of the trial had shifted irreversibly. The judge asked the girl to describe what she had seen, prompting her to indicate with her finger the same direction Max had followed during the investigation. Her small gestures, simple and deliberate, perfectly mirrored the dog's path and the recorded evidence. The courtroom leaned in collectively, absorbing the alignment of observation and proof. It was a rare convergence of innocence, instinct, and meticulously gathered facts, a moment that transcended typical courtroom procedure. Every person in that space felt the gravity, the human element, and the astonishing clarity of truth presented in its purest form. The girl repeated her two words once more. That one. The simplicity of her statement, combined with her pointing, created a ripple of astonishment. Jurors exchanged knowing looks, understanding without hesitation the precision and validity of her testimony. The defendant's gaze shifted nervously between the girl and Max, the weight of undeniable evidence pressing upon him. The prosecutor leaned back slightly, her calm confidence reaffirmed, while the courtroom's spectators struggled to contain murmurs of disbelief and awe. In that moment, two words had shifted the balance of power, proving that truth can emerge in the most unexpected forms. The judge, maintaining decorum, allowed a moment of pause. Cameras continued to record, pens scribbled furiously, and witnesses watched silently. Every individual present felt the weight of the revelation. What had started as a tense procedural trial had transformed into a moment of human connection and unexpected clarity. The innocence of a child, combined with the trained skill of a police dog, had illuminated the truth in a way that adults alone could not achieve. The atmosphere in the room was electric, filled with a sense of awe and recognition that this moment would be remembered for years to come. For a brief moment, the girl's world remained simple. She had pointed, spoken, and observed. Yet the courtroom's reaction, the shifting expressions of the jurors, the subtle acknowledgement from the officers, and the incredulous glance from the defendant, all highlighted the profound impact of her actions. She had entered a world of law, procedure, and tension, and, with nothing more than innocence, instinct, and clarity, had become a central figure in the pursuit of justice. The courtroom, once routine, now brimmed with a sense of wonder and human drama that words alone could not capture. And so, in that hushed, intense moment, the girl had achieved what many adults in that room could not. She had revealed truth, inspired awe, and reminded everyone present of the profound potential of observation, innocence, and courage. Her tiny voice, uttering only two words, had changed the course of the trial. The world outside the courtroom would later marvel at what had occurred. But in that room, the astonishment, tension, and profound human connection were immediate, visceral, and unforgettable. The courtroom was electric, buzzing with a mixture of astonishment, disbelief, and awe. For a moment, every conversation had ceased, replaced by the hum of stunned observers and the faint sound of the police dog's calm breathing. The tiny girl, still clutching her stuffed bear, sat upright in her mother's lap, her finger still pointing toward Max. She didn't fully comprehend the effect of her two simple words, that one, but their weight was unmistakable in the charged silence. The adults around her, trained in law, procedure, and investigation, were collectively grappling with the magnitude of what had just occurred. The judge, adjusting his glasses, leaned forward slightly, his hands folded over the bench. "Could you explain what you mean, young lady?" His voice was gentle but firm, a careful balance designed to encourage clarity while protecting the child from intimidation. The girl blinked, her gaze flicking between Max and the handler, then back to the judge. Slowly, deliberately, she raised her small hand again, pointing to the dog with absolute confidence. Every movement was measured, intentional, and filled with an authenticity that no adult could replicate. The courtroom leaned in collectively, aware that a crucial moment was unfolding. The prosecutor allowed a brief pause before prompting her next question. "Can you show us what this dog did that night?" she asked softly, her tone encouraging. The girl's tiny lips parted, and though her words were minimal, her gestures were precise. She traced the imagined path with her finger, mimicking the route Max had taken, while tracking the suspect to a discarded item behind a nearby alley. The jurors leaned forward, observing her tiny, determined movements. The simplicity of her demonstration carried an undeniable clarity, A child's innocent observation, confirming a chain of events that investigators had painstakingly documented. Spectators whispered to each other, some in disbelief, others in awe. "She actually remembers it," one woman murmured, her eyes wide. "And she's right," another replied, nodding slowly. The press scribbled furiously, capturing the remarkable intersection of innocence and evidence. Cameras clicked incessantly, broadcasting live images of the small girl pointing and gesturing with quiet precision. Even seasoned court reporters, familiar with dramatic testimony, paused, recognizing that this moment transcended typical legal proceedings. A 3-year-old child, with nothing more than her memory and instincts, had become the pivotal witness in a high-profile case. The defendant's face grew paler by the second. He shifted uncomfortably, tapping his fingers against the polished wood of the defense table. His confidence, previously bolstered by months of planning and preparation, began to crumble under the weight of the child's unassuming testimony. He glanced nervously at his lawyer, who attempted to whisper a reassurance, but even they recognized that undermining the girl's observation would be nearly impossible. Her pointing and minimal words perfectly aligned with documented evidence, leaving little room for doubt in the minds of the jurors. Mother's eyes glistened with tears as she watched her daughter participate so calmly and decisively. She gently whispered words of encouragement, brushing a strand of hair from the child's forehead. Pride, awe, and relief mingled in her gaze. The father sat beside her, hands clenched in silent tension, his eyes fixed on his daughter. He felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude that the child had been able to assist in such a meaningful way, even without fully understanding the scope of her actions. For them, this moment represented both innocence and courage, a reminder that even the smallest voices could carry extraordinary weight. Max remained perfectly still, ears perked and eyes alert, observing the girl's gestures with what seemed like understanding. A handler, experienced in countless high-pressure situations, nodded subtly, his calm demeanor masking the pride he felt for both the dog and the child. The silent coordination between them, the dog's trained behavior, and the girl's instinctive recognition, created a powerful visual for the courtroom. Observers sensed that something extraordinary had occurred, a convergence of meticulous training, natural instinct, and the raw clarity of a child's perception. The jurors exchanged glances, their expressions a mix of astonishment and comprehension. They understood immediately the significance of the girl's observation. It corroborated the dog's tracking, verified the timeline of events, and linked the suspect to the discarded item with undeniable clarity. Some jurors shifted slightly in their seats, leaning closer to one another, absorbing the power of this unexpected testimony. The courtroom's tension, once thick with uncertainty, began to transform into a recognition of truth, unfolding in its purest and most unlikely form. The prosecutor, sensing the impact of the moment, chose to let it breathe. She did not rush the child, allowing the gestures and words to speak for themselves. Every tiny movement reinforced the accuracy of the investigation. The simplicity of the child's testimony, combined with Max's demonstrated reliability, created a rare alignment of innocence, instinct, and evidence. Even those initially skeptical of involving a 3-year-old now recognized the profound weight of her participation. 2 words, a small finger, and a quiet demonstration had shifted the trial's trajectory. The defendant's lawyer attempted to interject, questioning the reliability of such a young witness. Yet the judge gently reminded them that the court must consider all evidence, including direct observations corroborated by trained professionals. The handler subtly nodded toward Max, reinforcing the dog's proven training and precision. The combination of human testimony and canine expertise created a compelling narrative that was difficult to dispute. Even the defense recognized, however reluctantly, that the girl's identification had added clarity that strengthened the prosecution's case. The gallery continued to react, some whispering words of amazement, others simply watching in stunned silence. A few spectators dabbed at tears, moved by the extraordinary intersection of innocence and justice unfolding before them. The courtroom, usually a place of rigid procedure and formality, was now alive with human emotion, a shared experience of awe and recognition. People realized that something remarkable had occurred. A small child, unassuming and gentle, had become central to the pursuit of truth in a serious legal case. The judge, maintaining composure, asked one final clarifying question. "Can you tell us again what happened that night?" he requested, voice soft and patient. The girl, small but unshakable, repeated her gesture and softly said, "That one." She mimicked the path Max had taken with precise finger movements, reinforcing the chain of evidence. The jurors nodded subtly, recording the significance of her actions in their minds. Even the defendant's confidence faltered further under the undeniable clarity of her testimony. The prosecutor gently guided the girl through additional gestures, asking her to indicate the object Max had tracked. The child's small hands moved with precision, tracing the path to the discarded item behind the alley. Each motion mirrored the official documentation, creating a vivid, undeniable confirmation of the investigation. The courtroom absorbed the spectacle in silence. Observers were aware that what seemed like a small, innocent display had revealed a critical piece of the puzzle, bridging gaps in understanding and validating the dog's remarkable work. The officers exchanged subtle nods, recognizing the success of their careful preparation. Every detail, the child's comfort, the dog's training, and the orchestration of the demonstration, had come together seamlessly. Max had been trained to remain calm under pressure, and the girl's natural observation skills complemented that training perfectly. Together, they had created a moment of undeniable truth, one that required no embellishment or adult interpretation. The courtroom's reaction was immediate, visceral, and unanimous. Recognition that justice had been illuminated by the smallest of witnesses. The parents shared a private glance, a mixture of pride and relief. They had supported their daughter's involvement with caution, aware of the gravity of the trial, and now they witnessed the extraordinary impact of her innocence. Their emotions swirled, pride, amazement, relief, and awe, as they observed her participate so calmly, confidently, and accurately. In a space dominated by adults and procedural formalities, the child's authenticity and instinct shone with an unexpected brilliance. Even the media recognized the moment's significance. Reporters whispered to each other, scribbling notes, adjusting cameras to capture every gesture. This was no ordinary testimony. It was an extraordinary demonstration of how innocence, observation, and preparation could converge to reveal critical truths. Articles would later describe the scene with words like astonishing, unbelievable, and heartwarming. Photographs captured the precise moment the child pointed, immortalizing the instant when simplicity became monumental, and when two words transformed the energy of a courtroom. The defendant's composure crumbled entirely. He slumped slightly in his chair, staring at the small child with a mixture of disbelief, frustration, and fear. The lawyer attempted a few hurried objections, but the judge's patient guidance maintained focus on the child's observations. The subtle alignment of evidence, gesture, and corroboration left the defense with little room to maneuver. The courtroom had shifted. The emotional and evidentiary weight of the child's testimony could not be understated. And so, in that charged, hushed environment, the little girl, clutching her bear, had done something extraordinary. With 2 words and a simple gesture, she had not only stunned the courtroom, but also provided critical confirmation of the investigation. Adults, law enforcement, jurors, and spectators were collectively witnessing a rare and profound convergence of innocence, observation, and justice. It was a moment that would echo beyond the walls of the courthouse, becoming a story the community would remember for years to come. The courtroom remained suspended in a quiet tension, the echoes of the child's two words lingering in the air. That one, simple, innocent, yet powerful enough to redirect the energy of a room that had seen its share of serious trials. The little girl, clutching her frayed stuffed bear, had done something no adult had anticipated. She had identified the pivotal link between the suspect, the police dog, and the discarded evidence. Every eye in the room now registered the weight of what had just occurred. Even the most seasoned officers, jurors, and lawyers seemed momentarily suspended in awe. The judge, leaning slightly forward over the bench, adjusted his glasses and addressed the room with measured authority. "We've witnessed something extraordinary," he began, his voice calm yet imbued with gravity. "This courtroom has seen professionals testify, evidence introduced, and expert witnesses provide detailed accounts. But today, we have observed a combination of innocence and instinct that confirms, beyond doubt, a crucial connection in this case." His eyes met the jurors, ensuring they understood the significance of the child's participation without bias or embellishment. The jurors, previously scribbling notes and quietly observing, now sat upright, their attention laser-focused. They watched the girl again, noting her gestures, her eyes, and her unerring focus on Max, the police dog. Every motion she had made, from pointing to mimicking the dog's path, had aligned perfectly with the documented investigation. Her clarity was startling, a reminder that observation, untainted by assumptions or ego, could provide insights even the most trained adults might miss. The courtroom collectively acknowledged the rarity of what they had just witnessed. Not Max, sitting calmly beside his handler, seemed to understand that the moment held significance beyond his training. The dog's eyes, alert yet composed, followed the tiny girl with quiet recognition. Every subtle movement, a tilt of the head, the shifting of paws, reinforced the bond that had formed between witness and canine. The handler, experienced and disciplined, allowed the dog's presence to remain unobtrusive yet pivotal, knowing that the demonstration's authenticity depended on the dog's calm composure. Together, they had created a visual and tangible confirmation of events that words alone could not convey. The prosecutor, seizing the opportunity to solidify the narrative, began to connect the dots for the jury. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said softly but firmly, "what we have just witnessed is more than a child pointing at a dog. This small act confirms the investigative work we have presented over the last weeks. Max, our police dog, tracked the suspect to a discarded item, and this young witness recognized that trail instinctively. Her observation corroborates our evidence, providing clarity and confirmation that is both rare and undeniable." Her voice carried a controlled excitement, aware that the courtroom was absorbing the full impact of the revelation. Spectators murmured quietly among themselves. Some shook their heads in disbelief, others whispered words of admiration. Cameras clicked, reporters scribbled rapidly, and the atmosphere buzzed with a mixture of astonishment and respect. The defendant's face reflected mounting anxiety. He leaned back in his chair, fingers drumming nervously against the polished wood of the table. His confidence, once seemingly unshakable, had been chipped away by the unexpected clarity provided by a 3-year-old. The realization that innocence could reveal truth more directly than argument or experience was an unsettling, humbling force. The judge allowed a brief pause, giving the jurors and courtroom a moment to process the sequence of events. Then, in a measured tone, he addressed the child's role more formally. "Young lady, you have helped this court today in a very important way," he said, his voice gentle but clear. "By pointing and showing us what you observed, you have confirmed information that was already under consideration. This is a very special contribution, and it helps all of us understand the truth more completely." His acknowledgement was both procedural and heartfelt, recognizing that the child's small actions had become central to the unfolding justice. The parents' emotions were visible, a mix of pride, relief, and awe. The mother's hand rested gently on the child's shoulder, fingers brushing back stray strands of hair. Her eyes glistened, reflecting the overwhelming magnitude of the moment. The father's hands were clasped tightly, a mixture of pride and lingering tension evident in his posture. They had worried about their daughter's exposure to the formalities and intensity of a courtroom, but now, witnessing her composure and precision, they realized the unique impact she had had. Their small child had achieved something extraordinary, bridging innocence and truth with remarkable clarity. The jurors leaned closer, their expressions a mix of comprehension and astonishment. They had been trained to consider evidence, evaluate testimony, and weigh facts impartially. Yet what they had just witnessed defied conventional expectations. A child, unburdened by bias or assumption, had pointed to the key piece of the puzzle, a police dog who had already been proven to track and detect with remarkable accuracy. The girl's testimony, though minimal in words, was monumental in effect, reinforcing the narrative of the investigation in a way that no adult testimony could replicate. The defendant's lawyer, finally realizing the full scope of the impact, attempted a few objections, citing the unreliability of such a young witness. The judge, maintaining calm authority, allowed the statement, but reminded the courtroom that the child's gestures had been corroborated by substantial evidence: the dog's training, prior documentation, and investigative records. The room held steady in attention, understanding that the convergence of innocence, instinct, and expert confirmation was not merely procedural, but profoundly compelling. Every observer recognized that the child's identification carried weight far beyond her age. The prosecutor returned to emphasize the clarity the child had provided. "We do not present this lightly," she said. "Max has been a reliable, trained officer in numerous investigations. The discarded evidence he located was crucial. And now, thanks to this young witness, we see that her observation confirms the dog's tracking beyond doubt." These two small elements, working together, provide the clarity needed to connect all aspects of the case and ensure that justice is served. Her voice was steady, conveying confidence without triumph, letting the facts speak through the remarkable simplicity of the child's testimony. The gallery remained in quiet awe, absorbing every moment. Spectators whispered quietly, some shaking their heads in disbelief, others exchanging looks of admiration for both the girl and the dog. Even the media present, accustomed to dramatic courtroom events, recognized the extraordinary nature of the testimony. In their notes and cameras, they recorded not only the child's actions, but also the visceral reaction of the courtroom, a blend of astonishment, respect, and acknowledgement that something truly remarkable had unfolded. The defendant's composure continued to erode. His hands trembled slightly, his jaw tight, and his eyes darted between the child and the dog. Even with legal representation and months of preparation, he could not counter the intuitive, precise connection demonstrated by a 3-year-old. Each repetition of her gesture, each soft word, reinforced the undeniable truth she had conveyed. He realized, belatedly, that innocence, when combined with instinct and clarity, could reveal a truth that logic and argument alone might never unearth. Max remained perfectly composed, yet there was an undeniable weight to the dog's calm attentiveness. The handler subtly patted him, acknowledging the dog's contribution and the seamless coordination between canine and child. Every observer in the room seemed to understand. What had occurred was more than testimony. It was a demonstration of collaboration between innocence and trained skill, revealing a truth that could not be ignored. The courtroom was now fully aligned with the significance of the revelation, a collective recognition of the extraordinary. The judge allowed the child a moment of quiet, acknowledging her effort and the significance of her contribution. "You have helped everyone understand something important today," he said. "Your observation, your gestures, and your courage have made a difference. Thank you for helping the court see the truth." The words resonated softly, carrying weight not just in procedure, but in recognition of the human and emotional impact of the moment. The courtroom exhaled collectively, the tension giving way to a profound acknowledgement of justice, illuminated in a new, unexpected form. And so, the revelation was complete. The chain of evidence, painstakingly gathered by law enforcement, corroborated by a trained police dog, had been validated in a moment of astonishing clarity by a 3-year-old child. The courtroom, witnesses, jurors, and spectators were all acutely aware that they had witnessed something exceptional. The alignment of innocence, instinct, and justice in a rare, unforgettable event. The impact would resonate far beyond the walls of the courthouse, marking a moment when the smallest voice carried the greatest weight, ensuring that truth, in its purest form, prevailed. The courtroom gradually began to return to its normal rhythm, though the atmosphere remained thick with a residue of awe and astonishment. The gallery's whispers persisted, low murmurs of disbelief mixed with admiration. Reporters scribbled feverishly in their notebooks, cameras clicked repeatedly, and the jurors sat, still absorbing the magnitude of the young girl's contribution. Outside, a mild summer breeze rustled through the courthouse grounds, but inside, the memory of her 2 simple words, "that one," lingered, an indelible mark on everyone present. The little girl, still clutching her bear, had been returned to her mother's care. Her small hands, sticky from the concession stand snack she had been allowed earlier, now rested in her mother's gentle grasp. She had done nothing extraordinary in her mind, merely pointed and repeated the words she remembered. Yet for everyone else, this was nothing short of remarkable. The girl had bridged the worlds of innocence and law, instinct and procedure, demonstrating a clarity that many adults could not achieve even after years of training. The prosecutor allowed a small, quiet smile to form, recognizing the unusual and profound impact of the child's testimony. She had prepared meticulously for every witness, every piece of evidence, every argument. Yet none of her plans could have predicted the simplicity and power of this moment. It was a reminder that in the pursuit of justice, sometimes the smallest participants could provide the clearest insight. She exchanged a subtle nod with the officer who had handled Max, acknowledging the extraordinary coordination that had led to this revelation. Outside the courtroom, the media swarmed. Reporters lined up for interviews, eager to recount the scene in vivid detail. Photographs captured the moment the little girl had pointed at Max, her small frame illuminated by the gallery lights. Television crews replayed the gestures, the words, the quiet authority of her innocent yet precise actions. Across the city, the story spread quickly. A 3-year-old, a police dog, and a courtroom moment that would become emblematic of instinct meeting justice. The public was captivated, the story touching hearts and inspiring widespread admiration. Back in the courtroom, the jurors remained deeply reflective. They had spent hours evaluating evidence, weighing testimony, and deliberating the credibility of adult witnesses. But the child's involvement provided something entirely new, clarity delivered without bias, without pretense, and without manipulation. They discussed quietly among themselves, nodding in understanding, absorbing the significance of her participation. For them, it was a reminder of the power of observation, the impartiality of innocence, and the unique ways in which truth could reveal itself. The defendant sat slumped at his table, his lawyer attempting a few whispered strategies, but the impact of the child's testimony was undeniable. The subtle weight of her 2 words, reinforced by the dog's documented tracking, had altered the dynamic of the trial. His previous confidence, carefully cultivated over months, had diminished under the realization that his fate was now intertwined with the unassuming clarity of a toddler's observation. Every small gesture, every quiet confirmation from the child, had chipped away at the foundation of his defense. The parents of the child, though initially concerned about her presence in the courtroom, now felt a profound sense of pride. They watched her play with her bear quietly, completely unaware of the depth of her contribution. Her mother whispered softly, "You did something amazing today," and the girl smiled faintly, patting her bear as if it had been part of the achievement. For them, this moment was a mix of emotional release and recognition. Their daughter had been brave, precise, and remarkably calm, even amidst the intensity of a high-profile courtroom. Max, the police dog, was gently led from the courtroom by his handler. The dog's calm demeanor had been crucial in maintaining the authenticity of the demonstration, and the subtle acknowledgement of his work was clear to everyone present. Officers exchanged quiet nods, appreciating the unspoken communication between handler and dog, and between dog and child. The coordination had been seamless, almost magical, highlighting the intersection of rigorous training and natural instinct. In that quiet aftermath, the dog had earned silent accolades for his role in an extraordinary display of truth. As the day progressed, discussions in the courtroom and beyond began to focus on the remarkable nature of the event. Lawyers, officers, and journalists alike remarked on how a 3-year-old could impact a case with such clarity. Editors prepared headlines that would soon appear in print and online. Toddler's 2 words stun courtroom. Child and police dog reveal crucial evidence, and innocence illuminates justice. Across the city, this story circulated rapidly, captivating public attention and inspiring conversations about the unpredictability and beauty of human observation. The jurors, when allowed a short break, stepped outside into the warm afternoon sun. They discussed the unusual testimony in quiet tones, expressing admiration and mild disbelief. "I've seen witnesses before," one juror remarked, "but nothing like that. She just knew." Another nodded, adding, "And she pointed exactly where Max had tracked. Incredible." Their discussions revealed the profound impact of the child's actions, not just in terms of legal relevance, but in terms of human understanding. Even adults, trained to evaluate evidence objectively, found themselves humbled by the clarity of a child's instincts. In the hallways outside the courtroom, the child's story became the topic of quiet conversations among clerks, law students, and other attendees. People marveled at the alignment of innocence and accuracy, recounting the moment when the girl pointed at Max and repeated her 2 words. The story spread quickly through the courthouse, prompting smiles, laughter, and an unusual sense of camaraderie. Even those who had been skeptical about involving a toddler in legal proceedings now recognized the value of her presence. What seemed improbable had proven undeniable. Meanwhile, the defendant was escorted back to his holding area, his thoughts heavy with the implications of the day's events. He reviewed the courtroom sequence in his mind, the child's gestures, her clarity, the unerring direction of her finger. His lawyer whispered reassurances, but even they understood that the trial had shifted dramatically. The combination of Max's reliable tracking and the child's precise observation had created an evidentiary alignment that would be difficult to dispute. The weight of 2 simple words had reshaped the trajectory of the case. The prosecutor returned to her office briefly, reflecting on the extraordinary day. She reviewed her notes, the video footage of the child's gestures, and the detailed tracking reports of Max. Every element aligned perfectly. She marveled at the unlikely but undeniable convergence of innocence and evidence. The combination was unprecedented in her experience, a reminder that justice could sometimes reveal itself in unexpected forms. She prepared her closing arguments with renewed confidence, aware that the impact of the child's observation would resonate strongly with the jury. Even outside the courthouse, the story spread like wildfire. Local news stations ran segments highlighting the courtroom moment. Social media posts captured images of the child pointing at Max, her innocent yet precise gesture becoming iconic overnight. Commenters marveled at her courage, instinct, and composure. Parents discussed the story with their own children. Educators highlighted it as a lesson in observation and honesty. And the general public was captivated by the unique interplay of innocence, law, and justice. The reach of her actions extended far beyond the walls of the courtroom. By the end of the day, the courtroom had returned to a semblance of its normal routine, but the energy lingered. Witnesses continued to recount their observations. Lawyers reviewed strategy, and jurors reflected on the remarkable events. Yet at the center of it all was the little girl, small and unassuming, clutching her bear, entirely unaware of the lasting impression she had made. Her clarity, instinct, and courage had provided a tangible, undeniable confirmation of the investigation, leaving a courtroom full of adults humbled and inspired by the simplicity of her 2 words. That one, the day concluded with quiet reflection. The officers, lawyers, jurors, and spectators carried the memory of the moment with them. The extraordinary convergence of a trained police dog and a 3-year-old's instinctive observation. Even after hours had passed, the weight of her contribution remained palpable. In a space dominated by procedure, evidence, and adult logic, a small child had provided clarity that no one could dispute, creating a story that would be remembered long after the trial concluded. The courtroom was quiet as proceedings resumed. A day's earlier events had left a palpable impression, and everyone, jurors, spectators, officers, lawyers, and even the judge, entered with a heightened awareness of the extraordinary role a small child had played. The little girl, now tired but composed, clutched her bear while her mother held her gently, whispering soft reassurances. Though she didn't fully understand the magnitude of her impact, her calm demeanor conveyed a confidence that belied her age. Her presence, simple and innocent, had changed the course of the trial. The judge called the court to order, his voice carrying a measured authority that acknowledged the day's unusual developments. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "we have witnessed remarkable events over the past several hours. The testimony of our youngest witness has provided clarity and confirmation of evidence already presented. It is now up to this jury to weigh all information, including observations provided by our youngest participant, and reach a verdict based on the facts presented." The words were carefully chosen, balancing procedural gravity with recognition of the child's contribution. The jurors, previously captivated by the girl's gestures, now leaned forward attentively, reviewing their mental notes. They had seen the alignment of instinct, observation, and evidence, and it weighed heavily in their deliberations. The combination of Max's trained tracking and the child's precise identification had created a rare convergence of innocence and accuracy. Each juror silently acknowledged the significance of the testimony. A 3-year-old had, through instinctive observation and clear communication, illuminated the truth in a way that adult witnesses could not replicate. Defendant's confidence had diminished over the past days. He sat quietly, shoulders hunched, hands clasped tightly. His lawyer whispered strategies, yet even they recognized the influence of the child's testimony. The evidence, corroborated by Max and validated through the girl's observations, was formidable. The subtle tension in the room reflected an understanding shared by everyone present. The small gestures of an innocent child had proven pivotal in revealing the truth. The impact of her actions was undeniable, resonating throughout the courtroom. Outside the courtroom, the media had assembled a small crowd, eager to report on the extraordinary events. Photographers and reporters documented every angle, capturing the moment the little girl had pointed at Max and uttered her 2 words. Social media posts, news stories, and live broadcasts amplified the story, highlighting the unusual but undeniable intersection of innocence and justice. The public, captivated by the narrative, discussed the event widely, celebrating the courage and instinct of a 3-year-old who had become central to a high-profile case. Back inside, the jurors convened for deliberation. They spoke in hushed, deliberate tones, weighing every piece of evidence presented over the course of the trial. Yet the child's testimony remained the focal point of their discussions. One juror noted quietly, "Her gestures matched the dog's tracking exactly. It's undeniable." Another added, "And she pointed with certainty." That's remarkable for someone her age. The conversation, while procedural in tone, carried an undertone of awe and appreciation. The jury recognized the significance of the child's involvement, acknowledging the clarity her actions had brought to an otherwise complex case. The prosecutor prepared to present the closing arguments, incorporating the child's contribution into the broader narrative of the trial. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," she said, her voice calm, yet compelling, "we have presented extensive evidence linking the defendant to the crime. Yet today, a unique confirmation has occurred. A 3-year-old witness has provided clear, instinctive verification of the path taken by our police dog, Max. This testimony, simple but profound, confirms the accuracy of our investigation and reinforces the truth we have presented." Her words resonated throughout the room, emphasizing the extraordinary impact of the child's observation. The defendant's lawyer attempted a final objection, suggesting that a toddler's observation could not carry weight in legal proceedings. The judge, maintaining a composed and authoritative tone, reminded the courtroom that all evidence, including corroborated observations, must be considered by the jury. The child's gestures had been consistent, validated by trained officers, and aligned with tangible evidence. The courtroom, now fully aware of the significance, remained silent in collective anticipation, understanding that the stage was set for the trial's final resolution. The jury returned after a brief deliberation, faces tense but focused. Each member understood the gravity of their role and the extraordinary factors at play. The foreperson rose, unfolding a sheet of paper with deliberate care. "We, the jury," she began, "having considered all evidence, testimony, and observations, including those provided by our youngest witness, find the defendant guilty as charged." A hushed wave of acknowledgement passed through the courtroom. The verdict, grounded in both procedural rigor and the extraordinary contribution of a 3-year-old, resonated with a sense of justice fulfilled. The defendant's reaction was one of disbelief, his shoulders sagging as reality set in. His lawyer muttered quietly, the weight of the outcome evident in his expression. Across the courtroom, the prosecutor allowed herself a subtle smile, satisfied that the pursuit of truth had been aided by an unexpected source. Max, the police dog, remained calm at his handler's side, oblivious to the media attention yet central to the resolution. The child, gently squeezed by her mother, seemed unaware of the enormity of the moment, but appeared content and secure, a quiet hero of the day's events. Outside the courtroom, spectators and media personnel erupted with quiet murmurs and hushed excitement. The story of a toddler and a police dog making a difference in a serious trial quickly spread through the city. Reporters captured interviews with jurors, officers, and the child's parents, all recounting the extraordinary events with a mix of awe and emotion. The narrative transcended mere legal proceedings. It became a human story of instinct, observation, and courage, inspiring public fascination and admiration. In the following days, the community responded with overwhelming interest and support. Local newspapers published feature stories. Television segments highlighted the child's pivotal role, and social media posts shared images of her gestures and words. Educators praised the importance of observation and honesty. Law enforcement highlighted the success of Max's training, and parents marveled at the power of innocence. Across the city, the story became emblematic of unexpected clarity, demonstrating that sometimes the smallest voices could illuminate truth in the most profound ways. The child's family reflected privately on the experience. Her parents marveled at her calm composure, precision, and instinctive understanding. They spoke softly about the importance of nurturing observation, honesty, and courage in young children. The parents also expressed gratitude toward law enforcement and the court for allowing their daughter to participate safely and meaningfully. For them, the experience was transformative, a reminder that even the smallest members of society could contribute to extraordinary outcomes. The courtroom itself became a place of quiet reflection for many involved. Officers discussed the seamless coordination between child and dog, marveling at the alignment of instinct, training, and observation. Jurors recounted the precision of the child's gestures and words, acknowledging the rare intersection of innocence and evidence that had guided their deliberations. Lawyers, reporters, and spectators alike carried with them the story of a moment that defied expectation and illustrated the profound ways in which truth could emerge. Months later, the story remained a subject of discussion, articles, and interviews. The little girl's 2 words, "that one," became synonymous with clarity, courage, and the unexpected power of observation. Law enforcement agencies cited the case as a unique example of collaboration between trained animals and human witnesses. The courtroom staff reflected on the extraordinary day as a reminder that even in structured, procedural environments, extraordinary moments of human insight could arise, leaving lasting impressions on all who bore witness. And so, the story concluded, not just with a verdict, but with a celebration of the unexpected ways truth can manifest. A toddler's simple gesture, a police dog's trained precision, and the careful orchestration of a courtroom had converged to reveal justice in its purest form. The impact of that day would be remembered by jurors, officers, spectators, and the family for the rest of their lives. The little girl had entered a world of adults, law, and procedure, and emerged as a quiet hero, a reminder that sometimes innocence sees what experience cannot. In the end, it was not just a courtroom victory. It was a story of humanity, instinct, and the remarkable clarity that can come from the smallest voices. The echoes of that one would linger far beyond the walls of the courthouse, a testament to courage, truth, and the extraordinary intersections that define justice. The child returned to her life, ordinary yet forever extraordinary, while the world carried with it a tale of hope, wonder, and the unforgettable power of observation.